The healing melody is a touching tale of love, loss and redemption that unfolds at Everhollow Farm. When Tessa Bray arrives seeking seasonal work, she brings with her a hidden gift, a voice that begins to heal Nathan Cole's grief-stricken heart. Their journey reveals how music can bridge broken souls and create unexpected harmony. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across Everhollow Farm as Tessa Bray pulled her worn duffel bag from the back seat of the bus driver's pickup truck. She'd hitched a ride from the last stop, saving herself a 2-mile walk down the country road. "You sure this is the right place?" asked the driver, eyeing the sprawling property with its weathered red barn and white farmhouse set back from the road. "Yes, this is it," Tessa said quietly, offering a small smile of thanks. As the truck pulled away, Tessa stood at the entrance to Everhollow Farm, taking in the peaceful scene. At 25, she had spent her life moving from one temporary home to another. The foster care system had taught her valuable lessons. Stay quiet, don't ask for much, and never get too attached. This seasonal farm job was just another temporary stop. She made her way down the gravel driveway, boots crunching on the stones. The farm looked bigger than she had imagined when she answered the ad in the local paper. Sheep dotted the rolling pastures, and the morning dew still clung to the tall grass. The screen door of the farmhouse creaked open, and a tall man stepped onto the porch. He wore faded jeans and a plaid flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His face was handsome but serious, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, and eyes that seemed to have seen their share of hard days. "Hi, you must be Tessa," he called, walking toward her. "I'm Nathan Cole. Welcome to Everhollow." His handshake was firm but brief, as if he was careful not to hold contact for too long. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Cole," Tessa said, her voice soft but clear. "Nathan is fine," he replied. "Let me show you around." As they walked the property, Nathan pointed out the sheep pastures, the equipment barn, and the small cottage at the edge of the property where Tessa would be staying. "It's not much, but it's clean and private," he explained as he unlocked the door to reveal a simple one-room cottage with a small kitchen area and a bed with a patchwork quilt. "It's perfect," Tessa said, genuinely pleased. It was more space than she'd had to herself in years. "Work starts at 5, Nathan said, checking his watch. "That gives you a few hours to settle in. We'll meet in the main barn." With that he left, his strides long and purposeful as he headed back to the main house. Tessa didn't take long to unpack. Her life fit into one bag and a small box of treasures, a journal filled with handwritten lyrics, a small music box that was her only link to her birth mother, and a few worn books. She ran her fingers over the journal's cover before placing it carefully on the bedside table. The cottage had a small bathroom with a shower that sputtered to life after a few moments. Tessa washed away the dust of travel, changed into clean work clothes, and decided to explore the farm before reporting for duty. The sheep barn was her first stop. Inside, the smell of hay and lanolin filled the air. Several ewes looked up at her entrance, their gentle eyes curious. A small lamb, weaker than the others, struggled to stay close to its mother. Without thinking, Tessa knelt in the straw beside the lamb. It was something she had always done, finding the ones who needed care, the ones who were overlooked. Softly, almost unconsciously, she began to hum. The tune was simple, one she had made up years ago in a foster home when a younger child couldn't. "Sleep." The lamb's ears perked up and it wobbled closer to her. Tessa's humming turned into a gentle song, her voice clear and soothing in the quiet barn. The lamb settled against her leg, its breathing steady. "There you go," she whispered between verses. "You're going to be just fine." Tessa lost track of time as she sang, first to the lamb and then to the other sheep who had gathered around her, drawn by her voice and calm presence. She didn't notice the shadow that fell across the barn door or the man who stood there, listening. Nathan had come to check on a pregnant ewe but stopped when he heard the singing. The voice coming from inside the barn was unlike anything he had heard since his wife had died. It held the same warmth, the same ability to make the air itself feel different somehow. For 3 years the farm had been silent, except for the necessary sounds of work and animals. After Emma's death, Nathan had put away her piano, her sheet music, all the things that reminded him of the music she had brought into his life. He had learned to live with the quiet, even if he never learned to like it. Now standing in the doorway listening to his new farmhand sing to his sheep, Nathan felt something stir in his chest, an ache so familiar it was almost a comfort. He retreated. Before Tessa could see him, unwilling to interrupt the moment or to explain the expression he knew must be on his face. That night, unable to sleep, Nathan found himself walking the grounds as he often did. The insomnia had been his constant companion since Emma's death, and the midnight walks helped quiet his mind. As he passed the sheep barn, he heard it again, that voice, soft and clear like warm dusk made into sound. He approached quietly and saw through the half-open door that Tessa was back, kneeling in the straw. The small lamb from earlier was curled up beside her, and she was singing what sounded like a lullaby. Nathan stood, transfixed, in the moonlight streaming through the barn windows with straw in her hair, and that voice filling the space around her. Tessa looked almost otherworldly. He didn't interrupt. He just listened until she finished her song, then silently made his way back to the empty farmhouse that had once been filled with music of its own. The next morning, Nathan approached Tessa as she was checking water troughs, quietly, cautiously, as if she might startle and flee. "You sing to the sheep?" he asked, his voice gruff from disuse. Tessa looked up, her cheeks flushing with color. She shrugged, embarrassed at being discovered. "It calms them," she replied softly. "Sometimes it calms me too." Nathan nodded, understanding more than she realized. He hesitated, then said the words that surprised them both. "If you sing like that for animals, would you sing for me too?" The question hung in the air between them. Tessa's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Nathan thought she might refuse. He wouldn't have blamed her. It was an odd request from a man she barely knew, but after a long moment, she nodded once. "Just once," she said quietly. "I could sing once." Nathan didn't push for more. "Thank you," he said simply, then moved on to discuss the day's work as if the exchange had never happened. That afternoon, as the day's heat began to fade and the shadows lengthened across the fields, Nathan worked to repair a broken gate at the edge of the sheep pasture. Tessa approached carrying 2 glasses of water. She handed one to him without a word, then set her own down on a fence post. Taking a deep breath, she began to sing. It wasn't a song Nathan recognized. The melody was simple but haunting, and the words spoke of open skies and finding shelter from storms. Her voice, unaccompanied and pure in the open air, seemed to fill all the empty spaces around them. Nathan's hands stilled on the gate. For the first time in 3 years, he felt the knot of grief in his chest loosen just slightly. He didn't look at Tessa as she sang, giving her the privacy of his averted gaze, but he listened, truly listened, as if her voice was water, and he had been thirsting for years. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Nathan picked up his hammer again and said simply, "Thank you, Tessa." She nodded, retrieved her water glass and walked back toward the barn. She had said just once, and she had meant it. The singing was too personal, too much like giving away a piece of herself. But as the days passed, something changed. Nathan began to speak more, not much at first, just a few extra words here and there. He'd point out a hawk circling overhead, or mention that the apples would be early this year. Small things, but from a man who had previously communicated in only the most necessary sentences, it felt significant. And sometimes, when they worked side by side in comfortable silence, Tessa would hum, not singing exactly, she kept her promise about that, but soft melodies that floated on the breeze as they mended fences or tended the sheep. One evening, about 2 weeks after Tessa's arrival, she was surprised to find Nathan waiting on the porch of her cottage. He held something in his hands, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might like this," he said, holding it out to her. Tessa unwrapped it to find a hand-carved wooden flute, simple but beautiful. "I made it years ago," Nathan explained, "for my wife. She played sometimes in the evenings." "Your wife?" Tessa asked softly. It was the first time he had mentioned having one. Nathan's eyes clouded with memory. "Emma. She died 3 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Tessa said, understanding now the sadness that seemed to follow him like a shadow. She filled this place with music, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I thought, maybe you could use this, if you wanted to. The offering felt significant, a piece of his past, his pain, handed to her with trust she wasn't sure she deserved. I don't know how to play, she admitted. A small smile touched the corner of Nathan's mouth. Neither did she at first, but she learned, said it was easier than the piano. Tessa's fingers closed around the flute. Thank you. That night, sitting on the porch of her cottage with the stars bright overhead, Tessa put the flute to her lips and tried to coax a sound from it. The first attempts were awkward, more breath than note, but gradually she began to find her way. From the dark window of the farmhouse, Nathan watched the small figure on the cottage porch. He couldn't hear the notes from this distance, but he could see how she bent over the instrument, patient and determined. For the first time since Emma's death, he allowed himself to remember without the crushing weight of loss. To remember the music, the laughter, the light she had brought. And for the first time he wondered if perhaps the farm didn't have to remain silent forever. Meanwhile, Tessa experimented with the flute, finding joy in the new sounds. But as the night grew deeper, doubt crept in. Her voice had always been her one true possession, the only thing that had never been taken from her, no matter how many homes she had moved through. And now she had shared it with Nathan, had let him hear what she had always kept private. It scared her. In her experience, whenever someone discovered her voice, they wanted to use it, control it, make it serve their purposes. Foster parents, who made her perform for guests, a high school teacher who tried to push her into competitions, a boyfriend who wanted her to try out for bands to support his ambitions. Nathan seemed different. He had listened, thanked her, and never asked for more. But Tessa had learned the hard way that people changed once they thought they had a claim on you. As she put the flute away and prepared for bed, Tessa reminded herself that Everhollow was temporary, just a job, just a stopping place. In a few months she would move on as she always did. But as she drifted off to sleep, the image that followed her into dreams was of Nathan's face as she sang, eyes closed, features softened briefly, at peace. For the first time in years, Tessa found herself wondering what it might be like to stay in one place, to make her temporary shelter into something more permanent, to sing not just once but again and again, in a place where her voice was heard but not possessed. And the thought, unexpected and fragile as a new shoot pushing through soil, scared her more than any fear of being used ever had. The summer days at Everhollow Farm settled into a rhythm. Tessa would rise before dawn, make a quick breakfast, and be in the barn by 5. Nathan would already be there, quiet and focused, ready to outline the day's tasks. What had begun as just once had somehow become their unspoken routine. As they worked side by side, mending fences, tending the sheep, harvesting vegetables, from the small garden behind the farmhouse, Tessa would sing. Sometimes just a verse or two, sometimes entire songs that seemed to pour out of her as naturally as breathing. Nathan never asked her to sing. He simply worked alongside her, and when her voice rose to fill the space between them, he listened. His shoulders would relax, and occasionally a small smile would touch his lips. "Where did you learn that one?" he asked one afternoon as they sorted apples from the orchard. Tessa looked up, surprised by the question. "I didn't learn it anywhere. I made it up." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "You write your own songs?" She nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Just little things. Nothing special." "They sound special to me," he said simply, then returned to his work. That evening, alone in her cottage, Tessa opened her journal and traced her fingers over the lyrics she had written over the years. Songs about moving on, about temporary homes, about the family she never had and the one she always hoped to find. Songs that had been her companions through lonely nights and uncertain days. For the first time she wondered what it would be like to share them. Not just the melodies, but the words, the pieces of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The next morning, a thunderstorm rolled in, heavy clouds turning the day dark before it properly began. Nathan found Tessa in the barn, making sure the frightened sheep were settled. Weather report says it'll pass by noon, he said, helping her distribute fresh hay. We'll work in here until then. As the rain pounded on the roof and thunder rumbled overhead, they worked in comfortable silence. Tessa noticed that Nathan seemed more at ease these days. He spoke more, smiled more, even laughed once when a determined lamb had followed her around like a puppy. "My wife would have liked you," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. Tessa paused in her work. "Why do you say that?" Nathan leaned on his pitchfork, looking into the middle distance as if seeing something beyond the barn walls. Emma loved music more than anything. She played piano since she was little. When we got married, the first thing she moved into the house was her upright piano. His voice softened with memory. "She used to say that a home without music was just a house. Is that why you asked me to sing that first time?" Tessa asked gently. Nathan nodded. "Partly. It had been so quiet for so long." He hesitated, then added, "And partly because when I heard you singing to that lamb, it was the first time in 3 years that I felt, I don't know, less broken maybe." The honesty in his words touched something deep inside Tessa. Before she could think better of it, she said, "I could sing something I wrote, if you want to hear it." Nathan's eyes met hers, surprise and something else. Hope, perhaps, flickering in their depths. "I'd like that very much." So as the rain fell and the sheep dozed in their pens, Tessa sang a song she had written during her last year in foster care. A song about waiting for a place that felt like home. About how home wasn't necessarily a building, but could be a feeling, a person, a moment of belonging. When she finished, the barn was quiet except for the sound of rain on the roof. Nathan stood very still, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Thank you." After that day, something shifted between them. Nathan began to share more about Emma, not just her music, but her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she could charm anyone with her smile. And Tessa found herself telling him about growing up in foster care, about the good homes and the not-so-good ones, about learning to pack light and keep her expectations lighter. "Did you ever try to find your birth parents?" Nathan asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tessa shook her head. "I thought about it, but I don't know. I guess I was afraid of what I might find or not find." Nathan nodded, understanding. Fear can keep us from a lot of things worth having. His words lingered with Tessa long after she returned to her cottage that night. Was fear keeping her from something worth having? She had spent so long protecting herself, keeping people at a distance, never allowing herself to want too much or hope too fiercely. But here at Everhollow, with its wide-open skies, and the man who listened to her sing as if it was the most precious gift anyone had ever given him, Tessa found herself wanting things she had never dared to want before. One rainy afternoon, as Nathan worked at his desk in the farmhouse, a knock at the door pulled him from his paperwork. He opened it to find Tessa standing there, slightly damp from the light drizzle, holding her journal. "I thought maybe," she began, then seemed to lose her nerve. "Come in," Nathan said, stepping aside. "I was just about to make some coffee." Tessa followed him into the kitchen, where the old farmhouse showed signs of both character and neglect. The cabinets needed painting, and the wallpaper was faded, but the large windows let in plenty of light even on this grey day. "I've been thinking about what you said," Tessa said as Nathan filled the coffee pot. "About fear keeping us from things worth having." Nathan turned to face her, leaning against the counter. And I thought maybe I could show you some of my songs, the ones I've written." She held up her journal, her knuckles white around its worn cover. No one's ever read them before. The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on Nathan. He nodded solemnly. "I'd be honored." They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from their coffee mugs, as Nathan carefully turned the pages of Tessa's journal. He read in silence, occasionally looking up at her with new understanding in his eyes. "These are beautiful." "Tessa," he said finally, closing the journal, "they deserve to be heard." She looked down at her coffee, uncertain. "I've never really thought about sharing them with anyone else." "Why not?" Tessa struggled to find the words. In the past, whenever people heard me sing, they always wanted something from me. To perform for their friends, to join their church, choir, to enter competitions. It never felt like it was about the music itself, just what my voice could do for them. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I can understand that," he said finally. "After Emma died, everyone had opinions about how I should grieve, when I should move on. It never felt like it was about what I needed, just what would make them more comfortable with my loss." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. "I've never met anyone who listens the way you do," Tessa admitted softly. "I've never met anyone whose voice makes the world feel less empty," Nathan replied. Hair between them seemed to grow thick with unspoken feelings. Nathan cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the moment. "I have something to show you too," he said, "if you want to see it." He led her upstairs to a small room at the end of the hallway. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a space that had clearly been closed off for some time. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the single window. In the center of the room stood an upright piano, its wood gleaming despite the dust covering its surface. "Emma's piano," Tessa whispered. Nathan nodded, running his hand along the top of the instrument. "I couldn't bear to look at it after she died, couldn't bear to hear it either, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it." Tessa approached the piano cautiously, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. "May I?" Nathan nodded, taking a step back to give her space. Tessa lifted the fallboard to reveal the ivory keys beneath. She pressed one gently, and a clear note rang out in the silent room. Despite years of disuse, the piano was still in tune. Emma insisted on having it tuned regularly, Nathan explained, seeing her surprise. Said a piano was a living thing and deserved respect. Tessa smiled at that. She wished she could have known this woman who had been so loved. "There's sheet music in the bench," Nathan said, gesturing to the seat, "if you want to look." Tessa lifted the lid of the piano bench to find stacks of sheet music neatly organized. Classical pieces, modern songs, handwritten compositions. Emma had clearly been a serious musician. As she leafed through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the floor. Nathan bent to pick it up, unfolding it with careful fingers. His face changed as he read whatever was written. "There, what is it?" Tessa asked. Nathan hesitated, then handed her the paper. It was a note written in a flowing feminine hand. "If you ever hear someone sing without fear, let them stay, even if it's not for you." Tessa read the words twice, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked up at Nathan, whose eyes were fixed on the paper in her hands. "I don't understand," she said softly. Nathan took a deep breath. "When Emma was in the hospital, near the end, she made me promise not to shut myself away. She said music would find its way back to the farm someday, and when it did, I shouldn't be afraid of it." He looked around the dusty room at the piano that had stood silent for so long. "I didn't understand what she meant then. I think maybe I do now." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Tessa felt something flutter in her chest. Hope, fear, possibility. "Nathan, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to see this room, to know about Emma, to understand why your voice means so much to me." They stood in silence for a moment, the dust motes swirling around them, the single note Tessa had played still seeming to hang in the air. "So I should go check on that pregnant you," Nathan said, finally breaking the spell. "Feel free to stay up here as long as you like." After he left, Tessa sat at the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. She hadn't played since high school music class, and even then only the simplest tunes. But sitting there in Emma's space, surrounded by the music she had loved, Tessa felt a connection to the woman she had never met. Tentatively, she began to pick out a simple melody, one of her own songs. The piano responded beautifully, the notes clear and pure in the quiet room. She didn't notice Nathan standing in the hallway, listening, a small smile on his face and tears in his eyes. That night, as Tessa walked back to her cottage under a sky full of stars, she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her songs with Nathan had lifted a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. Inside, she sat on her bed and opened her journal to a blank page. Words came easily tonight, flowing from her pen like water. A new song about second chances and finding your voice, about the courage it takes to stay when it would be easier to run. Meanwhile, in the farmhouse, Nathan stood at the window, watching. The light in Tessa's cottage. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that held more than just survival. A future with music, with laughter, with someone who understood both loss and hope. But as he turned away, from the window doubt crept in. Tessa was young, talented with her whole life ahead of her. What could he offer her but a rundown farm and the companionship of a man still haunted by grief? And what if he was reading too much into her kindness, her willingness to share her? Music. What if she was simply being nice to her employer, counting the days until her seasonal job ended and she could move on to something better? The thought of Tessa leaving, of the farm falling silent again, made Nathan's chest tighten with a familiar ache. He had survived loss once. He wasn't sure he could do it again. What neither of them knew was that fate had other plans, plans that would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine and force them to confront the fears that had defined them for so long. Because sometimes the hardest part of finding home isn't the journey. It's having the courage to walk through the door when you finally arrive. As July turned to August, the days at Everhollow Farm grew hotter, the work more demanding. The sheep needed constant attention in the heat, and the vegetable garden required daily watering. Yet despite the increased workload, Tessa found herself happier than she had been in years. Every morning, she woke up looking forward to the day ahead. It wasn't just the work, though she took satisfaction in the physical labor, in seeing the immediate results of her efforts. It was the company. It was Nathan. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, sometimes sharing dinner in the evening. On warm nights, they would sit on the porch of the farmhouse watching fireflies rise from the fields as Tessa played simple tunes on the wooden flute Nathan had given her. "You're getting good at that," Nathan remarked one evening as she finished a melody. Tessa smiled, pleased by the compliment. It helps to have a good teacher. Nathan had been showing her how to play the flute, his hands occasionally covering hers to demonstrate finger positions. Those brief touches sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I've been thinking," Nathan said, his voice casual despite the intensity in his eyes. "The county fair is coming up next week. Would you like to go? We could take a day off. The sheep won't mind." Tessa looked up in surprise. It was the first time Nathan had suggested anything that wasn't related to farm work. "I'd like that," she said softly. Nathan nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. It's a date, then." The word date hung in the air. Between them, neither acknowledging its significance but both feeling the weight of it. Later that night, as Tessa prepared for bed in her cottage, she found herself humming happily. The prospect of going to the fair with Nathan filled her with an excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. For once, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay at Everhollow beyond the harvest season, to let this temporary job become something more permanent. The thought scared her, but not as much as it once would have. The morning of the fair dawned bright and clear. Tessa took extra care with her appearance, wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual work clothes. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, she left loose around her shoulders. When she stepped out of her cottage, she found Nathan waiting, leaning against his truck. He had traded his work jeans for a cleaner pair and wore a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, maybe even awe. "You look nice," he said simply. "So do you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy. The drive to the fairgrounds was filled with comfortable conversation. Nathan pointed out landmarks along the way, telling stories about growing up in the area. Tessa found herself watching his profile. As he drove, noticing the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The county fair was everything a fair should be. Colorful, noisy, filled with the sense of fried food and the sounds of laughter. Tessa, who had rarely experienced such simple pleasures growing up, found herself delighted by everything. The carnival games, the livestock exhibitions, the craft displays. "What would you like to do first?" Nathan asked, watching her take it all in with childlike enthusiasm. "Everything," she answered honestly, making him laugh. They wandered through the fairgrounds, stopping to watch a pie-eating contest, betting on which of the local children would win. They visited the animal barns, where Nathan was greeted by, named by many of the local farmers. "Cole, didn't expect to see you here this year," called an older man in overalls. "You haven't come to the fair since—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes darting to Tessa. "Since Emma," Nathan finished for him, his voice steady. "Ben, this is Tessa Bray. She's helping me with the farm this season." Ben's weathered face broke into a wide smile as he shook Tessa's hand. "Well, now that's good to hear. That place is too much for one person to handle alone, no matter how stubborn that person might be." He winked at Nathan. As they moved on, Tessa noticed how many people seemed surprised, but pleased to see Nathan at the fair. She realized how isolated he must have been since his wife's death, how much of life he had been missing. "People seem happy to see you," she observed as they shared a funnel cake, the powdered sugar dusting their fingers. Nathan nodded, thoughtful. "I guess I haven't been very social these past few years. After Emma died, it was easier to just withdraw." "And now?" Tessa asked, her voice gentle. Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes warm. "Now I'm remembering there's more to life than just getting through the days." The moment was interrupted by the sound of an announcement over the fairground. Speakers, advertising the talent show that would be starting in the main pavilion. "Want to check it out?" Nathan asked. They found seats in the crowded pavilion just as the first act, a group of children performing a dance routine, took the stage. The talent show was typical small-town entertainment, some good, some comically bad, all enthusiastically received by the audience. "Next up," announced the MC, "Margaret Wilson with her prize-winning sheepdog, Rusty." As a middle-aged woman took the stage with her eager border collie, a man sitting behind Tessa and Nathan leaned forward. "Excuse me," he said to Nathan. "I couldn't help overhearing earlier. Did I hear you say your friend is a singer?" Nathan glanced at Tessa, then back at the man. "She is, yes." The man offered his hand. "James Barton. I'm with the Oak Ridge Musics Conservatory. We're always looking for local talent to perform at our concert series." Tessa felt her body tense. This was exactly the kind of situation she had always avoided, someone wanting to use her voice to put it on display. "I'm not really a performer," she said quickly. James smiled, not deterred. "That's what they all say at first. But with your voice, if what your friend implies is true, you could do well. We offer paid positions teaching music to children as well. If you're interested, I'd love to hear you sing sometime." "Thank you, but—" Tessa began. "She'll think about it," Nathan interrupted, giving her a look that said, "Trust me." James handed Nathan a business card. "Great. Have her call me if she's interested." He settled back in his seat as the next act was announced. Tessa felt conflicted emotions churning inside her. Part of her was annoyed that Nathan had spoken for her. Another part was terrified at the very idea of singing in front of strangers. And yet another part, a small, quiet part she usually ignored, wondered what it might be like to share her music with others, to turn her private passion into something more. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered to Nathan. "I know," he replied quietly, "but sometimes we need someone to hold the door open for us. You don't have to walk through it, but you should at least know it's there." After the talent show, they continued exploring the fair. Nathan won a small stuffed animal at a ring toss, game, and presented it to Tessa with exaggerated formality, making her laugh. They rode the Ferris wheel as the sun began to set, the countryside spreading out below them in a patchwork of farms and fields. At the top of the wheel, with the car swaying gently in the breeze, Nathan reached over and took Tessa's hand. The touch was simple, but it sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the height. "Thank you for coming with me today," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you for asking me," she replied, her fingers tightening around his. They rode home in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly, their hands occasionally brushing as Nathan shifted gears. It was full dark by the time they returned to Everhollow, the stars bright overhead. Nathan walked Tessa to her cottage door. "I had a good time today," he said, his hands in his pockets, suddenly seeming almost shy. "Me too," Tessa admitted with a small smile. They stood there for a moment, the night quiet around them except for the chorus of crickets in the fields. Nathan took a step closer, and Tessa felt her heart speed up. "Tessa," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you came here for a job, not this, whatever this is becoming. And if you want to keep things professional, just say the word, and I'll respect that. But I need you to know that these past months, with you here, with your music filling, this place again." He paused, searching for words. "It's like waking up after a long sleep." Tessa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such honesty, such vulnerability. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to care this much. I don't know how." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm scared too. After Emma, I swore I'd never put myself in a position to lose someone again. But here we are." "Here we are," Tessa echoed. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Nathan leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, and over, almost before it began. But it left Tessa breathless. "Good night, Tessa," Nathan said softly, stepping back. "See you in the morning." "Good night," she replied, watching as he walked back to the main house, his figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. Inside her cottage, Tessa touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. Everything was changing, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She took out her journal and began to write, the words coming faster than she could capture them. A song about taking chances, about the risk and reward of opening your heart, about how sometimes the most beautiful melodies are the ones we're most afraid to sing. The next morning, Nathan was waiting for her at the barn as usual. If there was a new warmth in his smile, a new tenderness in his eyes, neither of them mentioned it. They had work to do, and some things were too new, too fragile to be spoken of in the harsh light of day. But as they worked, Tessa sang, more freely, more joyfully than ever before. And Nathan listened, his heart lighter than it had been in years. That evening, after the day's work was done, Nathan found Tessa sitting on the porch of her cottage, the wooden flute in her hands. "I've been thinking about what that man said at the fair," he said, sitting beside her, "about the music conservatory." Tessa tensed slightly. "I'm not interested in performing." "I know," Nathan said quickly, "but he mentioned teaching too. Have you ever thought about that? Sharing your gift with children?" Tessa hadn't, but the idea took root in her mind. She had always been good with the youngest children in her foster homes, singing them to sleep when they were scared or sad. "I don't have any qualifications," she pointed out. "You have talent," Nathan countered, "and heart. Sometimes that's enough to start with. The rest can be learned." Tessa turned the flute over in her hands, considering. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Nathan nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask." Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened, though neither rushed to define it. They worked hard during the day and spent evenings together, talking, sharing meals, making music. Nathan brought Emma's piano downstairs to the living room, and sometimes Tessa would play simple melodies as he listened, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. One rainy afternoon, as they sorted through old boxes in the attic, Nathan came across something that made him pause. "I'd forgotten about this," he said, carefully pulling out a dusty photo album. They sat on the attic floor as Nathan turned the pages, showing Tessa pictures of his life with Emma, their wedding day, the early years at the farm, holidays and ordinary moments captured in time. "She was beautiful," Tessa said, looking at a photo of a vibrant woman with curly red hair and a wide smile sitting at the piano. "She was," Nathan agreed, "inside and out." He looked at Tessa, his eyes serious. "She would have liked you, not just because of your voice, but because of who you are." Tessa felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I wish I could have known her." "In some ways, I think you do," Nathan said softly. "Through her music, through this place she loved." As they continued looking through the album, they came to the last few pages, photos of Emma in a hospital bed, still smiling despite her obvious illness, Nathan at her side, holding her hand. "I couldn't bear to look at these for a long time," Nathan admitted, "but now it's good to remember all of it, even the hard parts." Tessa reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Thank you for sharing her with me." That night, as a storm raged outside, Tessa made a decision. She would call James Barton from the music conservatory, not because she wanted to perform, but because she was starting to imagine a future here. A future that would require more than seasonal farm work. A future where she might use her voice not just for herself or for Nathan, but to help others find their own music. The next morning, she borrowed Nathan's phone to make the call. James remembered her immediately and was enthusiastic about arranging an interview. "Fantastic. We're actually having a small gathering this Saturday evening, a fundraiser for our children's program. Why don't you come by?" No pressure to perform, just a chance to meet some people and see what we're about. Tessa agreed, surprising herself with her own courage. When she told Nathan about the invitation, his face lit up with pride. "That's wonderful, Tessa. Will you come with me?" she asked, suddenly nervous about facing a room full of strangers alone. "Of course," he said without hesitation. "I'll even dust off my good suit." Saturday arrived, and with it a new kind of nervousness for Tessa. This wasn't just about potentially singing for others or exploring a teaching position. It was about taking a step toward a more permanent life here, acknowledging that Everhollow had become more than just a temporary stop on her journey. Nathan, dressed in a suit that made him look even more handsome than usual, seemed to understand her anxiety. "We'll just go, meet some people, have some free food and leave whenever you want," he assured her, as they drove to the conservatory. No pressure. The Oak Ridge Music Conservatory was housed in a beautiful old building in the center of town. As they walked up the steps, Tessa gripped Nathan's hand tightly. "You'll be fine," he whispered, squeezing her hand in return. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." Inside, the fundraiser was in full swing. Well-dressed people mingled, sipping champagne and discussing music. James Barton spotted them immediately and hurried over. "Tessa!" "Nathan, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, shaking their hands enthusiastically. "Come, let me introduce you to some people." As they made their way through the crowd, Tessa was surprised by how welcoming everyone was. The conservatory's director, an elegant older woman named Elaine, seemed particularly interested in Tessa's background. "James tells me you have an exceptional voice," she said, "and that you write your own music as well?" Tessa nodded, uncomfortable with the praise, but forcing herself to stay engaged in the conversation. "We're always looking for instructors who bring something unique to our children's program," Elaine continued. "Would you be interested in observing some classes next week, just to get a feel for what we do?" "I'd like that," Tessa replied, feeling a spark of genuine interest. As the evening wore on, Tessa found herself relaxing, even enjoying the conversations about music and teaching. Nathan stayed by her side, his quiet presence a comfort in the unfamiliar setting. "They have a piano in the main hall," James mentioned casually as the party was winding down. "In case you'd like to play something." Tessa glanced at Nathan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "It's up to you," he said softly, "but I know they'd love to hear you." Tessa thought about all the years she had kept her music private, a secret gift she shared only with herself. She thought about how it had felt to sing for Nathan, to see the joy it brought him. And she thought about the children she might teach, children who might find in music the same solace and strength she had. "Just one song," she said finally, taking a deep breath. "A short one." James led them to the main hall, where a grand piano stood on a small stage. The room was mostly empty now, just a few lingering guests and staff members. Tessa sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. Nathan stood nearby, his presence giving her courage. She began to play a simple melody, one of her own compositions, and then her voice joined the piano, clear, pure, and stronger than she had ever allowed it to be before. She sang about finding home in unexpected places, about the courage it takes to stay when all you've known is leaving. As the last notes faded, there was a moment of silence, then enthusiastic applause from the small audience. "That was beautiful," Elaine said, approaching the piano. "Truly beautiful. I think you would be a wonderful addition to our staff, if you're interested." Tessa looked up at Nathan, who was watching her with pride and something else, something that looked a lot like love. "I am interested," she said, surprised by how right the words felt. Very interested. As they drove back to Everhollow that night, the future seemed to unfold before them like the starlit road ahead, full of possibility, of music, of hope. But neither of them could have predicted the challenge that awaited them at the farm, a challenge that would test everything they thought they knew about trust, about courage, and about what it truly means to come home, because sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that lead us back to ourselves, and sometimes the most beautiful songs are born from the deepest silence. The next morning, Tessa woke to the sound of rain tapping against her cottage window. The weather matched her mood, not sad exactly, but thoughtful, as if the world had shifted overnight and she was still finding her balance. She had sung in public. She had interviewed for a job at the music conservatory. She was considering a future here with Nathan at Everhollow Farm. For a woman who had spent her life moving on, these thoughts were both thrilling and terrifying. As she dressed for the day's work, Tessa wondered what Nathan was thinking. Last night, driving home from the conservatory, he had been quiet but content, his hand occasionally finding hers in the darkness of the truck cab. They hadn't talked about what might happen next, about her potential job, about them, about the future that suddenly seemed possible. She stepped outside, pulling her raincoat tight around her, and hurried toward the main barn. The farm was quiet in the rain, the sheep huddled under shelters, the fields misty and still. Nathan wasn't in the barn as usual. Tessa checked her watch, surprised to see it was already past 7. He was always up before her, always had the morning chores started by the time she arrived. Concerned, she walked to the farmhouse and knocked on the door. When there was no answer, she tried the handle and found it unlocked. "Nathan," she called, stepping inside. "Are you here?" The house was silent. A half-empty coffee mug sat on the kitchen table beside Nathan's phone. Everything else seemed in its place. Tessa checked the bedroom, the bathroom, even the attic, but Nathan was nowhere to be found. A knot of worry began to form in her stomach. It wasn't like him to leave without telling her, especially with work to be done. She returned to the kitchen, noticing now that a light was blinking on Nathan's phone, a voicemail. Without thinking, she pressed the button to play it. "Nathan, it's me," said a woman's voice, unfamiliar and slightly breathless. "I know it's been a long time, but I'm back in town. I need to see you. We need to talk about what happened. I'll be at the farm tomorrow morning." The message ended, leaving Tessa staring at the phone in confusion. The timestamp showed it had come in last night, after they'd returned from the conservatory. Who was this woman? And what did she mean? What happened? Before Tessa could consider further, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She moved to the window and saw Nathan getting out of his truck, his expression grim. Behind him, a sleek sedan parked, and a woman emerged, tall, elegant, with auburn hair that caught the morning light even in the rain. Tessa's heart seemed to stop for a moment, then resumed beating with painful intensity. The woman looked exactly like the photos Tessa had seen, like Emma. But Emma was dead. Nathan had told her so, had shown her pictures, had grieved for 3 years. This couldn't be Emma. It was impossible. Yet, as Tessa watched through the window, the woman approached Nathan, her movements hesitant but familiar. They spoke briefly, then Nathan gestured toward the house. Tessa stepped back from the window, her mind racing. Should she leave? Stay? Confront them? Before she could decide, the front door opened and Nathan entered, followed by the woman. They both stopped short when they saw Tessa standing in the kitchen. "Tessa?" Nathan said, his voice strained. "I didn't expect you to be in the house." "I was looking for you," she replied, her eyes moving between Nathan and the woman. "You weren't in the barn." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The woman looked at Tessa with curious eyes, then back at Nathan. "Is this her?" she asked softly. "The one who sings?" Nathan nodded, his face unreadable. "Tessa, this is Claire, Emma's sister. Sister, not Emma herself." Relief washed over Tessa. followed immediately by confusion. Nathan had never mentioned that Emma had a sister. "Nice to meet you," Tessa said. Automatically, though nothing about this situation felt nice, Claire didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, she turned to Nathan, her expression hardening. "You haven't told her, have you?" Nathan closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Claire, please, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Nathan?" Claire's voice rose slightly. "It's been 3 years. 3 years of silence, and now I find out from town gossip that you're moving on, that there's someone new singing in my sister's house, and you haven't even had the decency to tell her the truth." The words hung in the air like smoke. Tessa felt cold all over, her hands trembling at her sides. "What truth?" she asked, looking directly at Nathan. Nathan's face was ashen. He met Tessa's eyes, then looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "I should go," Claire said suddenly, seeming to realize the impact of her words. "I didn't come here to make things worse. I needed to see you, Nathan, to try to understand." She turned to Tessa. "I'm sorry, this isn't your fault, none of it is." With that, she left, the front door closing softly behind her. The sound of her car starting, then fading away, left Nathan and Tessa in silence. "What was she talking about?" Tessa asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What truth, Nathan?" Nathan moved to the kitchen table and sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "It's complicated, Tessa." "Then explain it to me," she said, standing her ground, "because right now I feel like everything I thought I knew about you, about us, might be a lie." Nathan looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain so raw it made her breath catch. "Not everything," he said quietly. "Not the way I feel about you. That's real, it's always been real. But the rest," Tessa pressed. Nathan took a deep breath. "Emma did die 3 years ago, that part is true, but the how, that's what I haven't told you." Tessa sat down across from him, her heart pounding. "Tell me now." "Emma had been sick for a while," Nathan began, his voice low and controlled. "Cancer, like I told you. But in the end, it wasn't the cancer that killed her. It was me." Tessa stared at him, not comprehending. "What do you mean?" "She was in so much pain," Nathan continued, his voice breaking. "The treatments weren't working. The doctors said it was just a matter of time. She begged me, Tessa. Begged me to help her end it on her terms, before the pain became unbearable." Understanding dawned on Tessa, a cold wave washing over her. "You helped her die." Nathan nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I loved her too much to watch her suffer." She wrote letters explaining her choice, one to her doctor, one to Claire. But Claire never accepted it. She blamed me. Said I should have waited, that there might have been a new treatment, a miracle. "That's why you never mentioned her sister," Tessa said, pieces falling into place, "because she blames you for Emma's death." "Yes," Nathan admitted. "Claire and I were close once. But after Emma, she couldn't bear to see me. And I couldn't bear to see the accusation in her eyes." Tessa tried to process this revelation, this new version of the man she had come to care for so deeply. Nathan wasn't a murderer. She knew that in her heart. He was a man who had made an impossible choice out of love, but he had kept this from her, had let her believe a simpler version of his grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice small. "At first, because it wasn't something I could talk about with anyone, let alone someone I had just hired," Nathan said wearily. "And then, when things started to change between us, I was afraid, Tessa. Afraid that if you knew, you'd look at me differently, that you'd leave." The irony wasn't lost on Tessa. She, who had spent her life leaving places behind, had become someone Nathan feared would leave him. "I need some time," she said finally, standing up, "to think about all this." Nathan nodded, resignation in every line of his body. "I understand." Tessa walked out of the farmhouse into the rain, which had grown heavier. She didn't go to her cottage or to the barn. Instead, she walked, letting the rain soak through her clothes, trying to sort through the tumult of her emotions. Nathan had helped his wife die, out of love, out of mercy, but he had done it, and he had kept this from Tessa, had let her fall. For him, without knowing this crucial piece of who he was. She thought of all the moments they had shared over the summer, the singing, the quiet evenings, the slow healing they had both been experiencing. Had any of it been real? Or was she just a replacement for what he had lost, a voice to fill the silence Emma had left behind? As she walked, the rain began to ease, and Tessa found herself near the sheep barn where she had first sung to the small lamb months ago. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and animals greeted her. She sat on a bale of hay, suddenly exhausted. She wasn't sure how long she had been there when the barn door creaked open. Expecting Nathan, she looked up, surprised to see Claire instead. "I thought I might find you here," Claire said, lingering in the doorway. "One of the neighbors said they saw you walking this way." "What do you want?" Tessa asked, too emotionally drained for pleasantries. Claire stepped fully into the barn, closing the door behind her. To apologize and to explain. She sat on another hay bale, keeping some distance between them. "I shouldn't have ambushed you both like that." "No, you shouldn't have," Tessa agreed. "But I'm glad I know the truth now." Claire studied her face. "He told you everything? That he helped Emma die?" "Yes." Tessa met her gaze steadily. "Is there more I should know?" Claire sighed, looking down at her hands. "No, that's the heart of it. My sister was dying, in terrible pain, and she asked Nathan to help her go on her own terms. He loved her enough to do it, even knowing what it would cost him." "But you blame him?" Tessa said, not a question but a statement. "I did," Claire admitted. "For a long time. It was easier to be angry at Nathan than to accept that Emma was really gone, that she had chosen to leave us." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I was wrong. I've known it for a while now. I found Emma's journal after it happened." She wrote about her decision, about how Nathan tried to talk her out of it at first, about how grateful she was for his love. "Then why come back now?" Tessa asked. "Why not tell Nathan this sooner?" Claire's laugh was sad. Pride, stubbornness, grief, take your pick. It's not easy to admit you've been wrong, especially about something so important. She paused. "And then I heard about you. That Nathan had hired someone new, someone who sang, that he was starting to live again. And that bothered you," Tessa guessed. "It surprised me," Claire corrected. "And then it made me realize it was time to make peace. Emma wouldn't have wanted us to stay broken like this. She loved Nathan. She loved me. She would have wanted us to heal." They sat in silence for a moment, the soft sounds of the sheep the only noise in the barn. "Do you love him?" Claire asked suddenly. The question caught Tessa off guard. I don't know," she said honestly. "I think I could, but this changes things." "Does it?" Claire pressed. "Nathan is still the same man you've come to know these past months, the same man who listened to you sing, who gave you space to find your voice." "But he lied to me," Tessa insisted. "He omitted a painful truth," Claire countered. "There's a difference. And before you judge him too harshly, ask yourself if you've shared every painful part of your past with him." The words hit Tessa like a physical blow. She thought of all the things she hadn't told Nathan about her life in foster care. The worst. Holmes, the deepest hurts, the reasons she had learned to keep her singing private. She had shared some of it, but not all, never all. "I should go," Claire said, standing up. "I've said what I came to say. What you do with it is up to you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Emma wrote this, the day before she died. I found it with her journal. I think you should have it." She placed the paper on the hay bale and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. "Whatever you decide, Tessa, I hope you keep singing. The world needs more music, not less." After Claire left, Tessa sat for a long time before reaching for the folded paper. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find a few lines in the same flowing handwriting she had seen on the note about letting someone who sings without fear stay. "If you're reading this," it began, "it means Nathan has found someone worth sharing his heart with again. I hope you understand what that means. Nathan loves completely, without reservation. It's his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. He helped me leave this world on my terms because he loved me enough to put my needs above his own. If he loves you even half as much, you are blessed beyond measure. Be gentle with his heart. It's been broken before, but it's still the best heart I've ever known. Tears blurred Tessa's vision as she read the words again. Not the words of a woman who felt betrayed or abandoned, but of one who had been deeply, truly loved, and who had loved in return. Tessa folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she began to sing. Not a song she had written before, but a new one, the words and melody coming to her as naturally as breathing. A song about forgiveness and second chances, about the courage it takes to stay when all your instincts tell you to run. She didn't notice the barn door opening, didn't see Nathan standing there, listening, until the last notes faded away. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Tessa looked up, her heart racing at the sight of him. "Nathan." "I was worried about you," he said, staying by the door as if afraid to come closer. "When you didn't come back." "Claire found me," Tessa told him. "Fa busi di carefree." "We talked." Nathan's expression was guarded. "What did she say?" "That she was wrong to blame you, that she found Emma's journal, read what she wrote about her choice." Tessa stood up, taking a step toward him. "She gave me a note from Emma." Nathan's face showed surprise, then a flicker of fear. "What did it say?" Tessa didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked the question that had been burning in her heart since his revelation. "If I stay, Nathan, will it be because of me, or because my voice reminds you of what you lost?" Nathan closed the distance between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you stay, Tessa, it will be because you taught me that it's possible to honor what's past without being trapped by it, because you brought music back into my life when I thought I'd never want to hear it again, because you are you, not a replacement, not a reminder, but someone entirely new who I've come to care for deeply." He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything sooner. I was afraid, not just that you would judge me, but that you would see how broken I still am in some ways. That you wouldn't want to take on someone with so much history, so much pain. We're all broken in some ways," Tessa said softly. "That's how the light gets in." Nathan smiled faintly at that. "So what happens now?" Tessa took a deep breath. "Now I tell you that I called the conservatory this morning before everything. They offered me a part-time teaching position, 3 days a week." "That's wonderful," Nathan said, genuine happiness in his voice despite the uncertainty between them. "You'll be amazing at it. It would mean I'd stay in the area," Tessa continued. "I'd need somewhere to live." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. "The cottage is yours for as long as you want it. Whether that's as my employee or," he hesitated, "or as something more." "I think," Tessa said carefully, "that I'd like to find out what something more might look like. But slowly, with no more secrets between us." Relief and joy transformed Nathan's face. "No more secrets," he agreed, "just truth. And music. And maybe love," Tessa asked, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she never had before. Nathan cupped her face in his hands. "Definitely love," he whispered, before kissing her. Not the tentative kiss of their first night, but a kiss full of promise and possibility. In the weeks that followed, healing came to Everhollow Farm in many forms. Claire visited again, bringing boxes of Emma's things she had kept all these years. Photographs, books, sheet music. Together, the three of them sorted through the memories, laughing sometimes, crying others, but always honoring the woman who had touched all their lives. Nathan and Tessa took their time, building something new and strong between them. She began teaching at the conservatory, discovering a talent for helping children find their musical voices. He continued running the farm, but now with a lightness that had been missing for years, and in the evenings, music once again filled the farmhouse. Sometimes Tessa sang while Nathan played Emma's piano, which he had tuned professionally. Sometimes Claire joined them, adding her violin to the melody. The farm that had been silent for so long became a place of harmony once more. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves were beginning to turn, Tessa stood in the sheep barn where her journey at Everhollow had truly begun. The weak lamb she had sung to months ago was now strong and healthy, part of the flock but still special to her. As she knelt to check on a new lamb born just days before, she began to sing softly. A lullaby, simple and sweet, the kind she now taught her youngest students at the conservatory. She didn't notice Nathan entering the barn, didn't see him stop to listen, a look of love and wonder on his face. When she finished the song, the sound of gentle applause made her turn. "That was lovely," Nathan said, coming to kneel beside her. "But then everything you sing is lovely." Tessa smiled, leaning against him as they watched the lamb drift off, to sleep. "I used to be afraid of letting people hear me sing," she confessed, "afraid they'd try to take my voice away somehow, make it serve their purposes instead of mine. And now," Nathan asked, his arm around her shoulders, "now I understand that sharing your gift doesn't mean losing it. It means letting it grow." She looked up at him. "You taught me that." Nathan shook his head. "You taught yourself. I just listened." As they walked back to the farmhouse together, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a girl who never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home, to a woman who had found not just a place to belong, but people to belong with. That night after dinner, Nathan disappeared into his study for a few minutes. When he returned, he handed Tessa a small box. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Open it and see," he replied, a nervous smile playing at his lips. Inside the box was a key, small, old-fashioned, clearly not new. "It's the key to the farmhouse," Nathan explained. "Emma's key, actually. I found it when Claire and I were going through some of her things last week." Tessa looked from the key to Nathan, understanding dawning. "Nathan, I'm not asking you to move in right away," he clarified quickly, "or to make any decisions you're not ready for. I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, this is your home too. Not just the cottage, all of it." Tears filled Tessa's eyes as she closed her hand around the key. "I think," she said softly, "that I've been ready for a home for a very long time. I just never found the right one until now." Nathan pulled her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Welcome home, Tessa," he whispered against her hair. Later that evening, as Nathan slept beside her on the couch where they had been watching an old movie, Tessa gently extracted herself and walked to the piano. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and Nathan's soft breathing. She sat at the piano and began to play, her fingers finding the keys for a song she had been working on for weeks. A song about a journey that ended where it began, about finding home in the most unexpected place, about a voice that had always been hers but that she had finally learned to share. As she played, she felt a presence in the room, not frightening, but comforting, like someone else was listening besides Nathan. Perhaps it was just her imagination, or perhaps it was something more. Either way, Tessa sang, for herself, for Nathan, for the woman whose piano this had been, and for all the children she would teach to find their own voices in the years to come. Because that's what music is in the end, a bridge between hearts, between lives, between what was and what could be, a way to say what words alone cannot, a way to sing ourselves home. The end.